Well, the B-24 Liberator was probably the biggest aircraft that I'd ever seen, let alone flown in. It was 4-engine, tricycle undercarriage with twin tails, and it was a flying coffin. Not only did our guys refer to them as a flying coffin, but the Americans did as well. It was a shocking aeroplane. It should never have flown. When I enlisted in the Air Training Corps, the sergeant that was taking all my details, he wrote down my birth date as 1925. So when I turned 17, I got called up because they thought I was 18. And my mother was shocked. She didn't want a bit of it, but my father said, if he wants to go, let him go. And I said, yes, I want to go. And they wanted me to go into the army, and I said, no way, I'm not going in the army. I'm determined to fly. So when my enlistment papers came, I went into the Air Force. And I got categorised as a pilot, and I went to Cunderton to do my initial flying training on Tiger Moths. And anyway, when I finished my initial training on Tigers, I got posted to Geraldton to do Avro Ansons. And I'd done about 20 hours, and we were doing crosswind landings, and I got a beauty. And I wiped the undercard off the Anson. Well, after I'd pranged the Anson and I was recategorised, I was given the choice of recategorising to either a navigator, a wireless operator or an air gunner. As you can understand, I was pretty disappointed because from a kid I always wanted to fly. And to have to be downgraded from a pilot to an air gunner was pretty upsetting as far as I was concerned. But that was life, I had to accept it. Later on, when I finished as an air gunner, I couldn't say I was really disappointed because it was a pretty interesting job. When we went to Tuggermore, there was all air crew there, pilots, navigators, wireless operators, air gunners, and they all used a universal mess so that you got to know everybody. And I crewed up with a bunch of guys. The various gunners in our crew took the positions that they wanted, like nose gunner, tail gunner, ball gunner. I was the mid-upper gunner for our crew. And as a mid-upper gunner, my role was to control the firing and actually morale of the gunners. And as a 19-year-old, I tell you that buoyed me up no end because I was the youngest in the crew by far. When we did the bombing of Borneo, the Japanese had no fighter aircraft in opposition, so I never fired a shot in anger, but they still had plenty of anti-aircraft. And a slice came up through the aircraft skin and took me on the right leg just behind the knee. And it put me out of action for a couple of weeks. Well, a few of us were out on the tarmac one morning, and this Liberator came back and had been badly shot up, and they couldn't get the ball turret down. Now, the ball turret normally is wound up into the aircraft until it's needed, and then it gets wound down, and the air gunner inside the ball turret has got the controls to wind it up and down. Now apparently this hadn't happened, and they were trying to wind it up manually, and they couldn't move it. and the aircraft flew round and round and round trying to use up fuel as well as try and get this turret up. Now, a Liberator is a tricycle undercarriage aeroplane, and the actual skin of the aeroplane is not much more than a couple of feet off the ground when it's taxiing. So when this aircraft couldn't get the turret down, and they finally had to land, they had to. And unfortunately, when they landed, they just wiped the ball turret off with the gunner inside it. It was a pretty shocking episode to witness, especially. Well, as we arrived at Ambon, the war finished in Europe, and we all thought that was going to be it, but it wasn't, because the Japanese kept fighting on, and most of their oil reserves was coming from Borneo. So 23 Squadron, 21 Squadron and 24 Squadron continually bombed Pasir and a number of the other oil wells there. And we were returning from a bombing run when we got the signaller, our aircraft signaller, screamed out across the intercom, "The war's over, the Japanese have surrendered." Once the war was over, the Liberator squadrons were re-enlisted to go to Singapore and bring back the prisoners of war. Well, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe man's inhumanity to man, the way the Japanese had treated our prisoners of war. They were in shocking condition, and these were the people who could walk that we were bringing back. People who were hospitalised and immobilised were sent back by ship. I couldn't believe that these were human beings. There was nothing of them, skin and bone. Seen some horrible things. I just couldn't believe that people had been treated like this just because they were prisoners of war, because the Japanese believed if you were a prisoner of war, you were nothing. Well, as you know, I'd always wanted to fly, and being busted as a pilot, but when we crewed up, I used to quite often sit in the co-pilot seat and fly the aeroplane because my skipper thought that was great. But when the war was over and we had this huge fly past over Sydney, and I flew the aeroplane over Sydney, which was, for me, a big day. And I really appreciated that.